Hi and welcome to this part 2 of fitting the hydraulic clutch conversion kit to my Benelli TnT. Now I've sorted out what the problem was. One of the holes on the crankcase here wasn't actually drilled in the correct position. It was actually slightly off by about 1 mil to 1.5 mil. Now at the suggestion of Alex from Maniac Motors, I've actually drilled out the mounting holes in the slave cylinder to 7.5mm. They were 6.5mm. And that seems to have cured the problem. The slave cylinder now fits perfectly. So we can continue with the installation. Now I've already fitted the clutch rod and I've put some lube on it. There's some oil on the rod further in, and I've just put a little bit of grease where it'll go into the O-ring on the base. So I'll just put the base on now. And I put a little bit of Loctite on the base itself onto a little nubbin that projects out the bottom there, just to help it seal. So now we'll fit the master cylinder. So now we'll just thread the hydraulic line through. Just remember to clean any dirt that you get on the line off. Now we can mount the Banjo to the slave cylinder. Just remember to put the crush washers on. There's one top and bottom of the Banjo bolt. So put a crush washer on top, one on the bottom. And now we can fit the top Banjo. Again, we need to fit a crush washer top and bottom. Now it's time to add some fluid to the master cylinder. They recommend .3 or .4 brake fluid. I'm using a Motul one here. Now I'm using a vacuum bleeder. That's this thing here. It just hooks up to your air compressor, has a venturi in it, which creates a vacuum in the bottle and just makes your life a lot easier. These systems don't always work on brakes with ABS on them, but for something like this clutch master cylinder, getting the air out, this will be perfect. All you need to do is loosen the bleed nipple here, which I've already done, or maybe not. So it's loose, and then you do need to keep an eye on the master cylinder to make sure the fluid doesn't run out, otherwise you get more air in the system. And what you're looking for is fluid to appear here, so I'll just turn that off while I put some more fluid in up top. On with that. So once we've actually got the fluid down here, we've still got some air in the clutch slave cylinder here. So we now have to bleed in the traditional manner. So what we do is we pump up the lever 3 or 4 times, release the bleed nipple, then tighten the bleed nipple when the pressure is released, pump it a few more times until we start getting lever feel. Well, that's the clutch line bled, and the lever pull is actually quite nice. It's a lot lighter than it was with the cable operated clutch. Now I must admit that the cable on this bike was the original one that came with the bike, so it was 14, 15 years old, which means it was probably dry and not in the best of condition. So even replacing the cable may have made a difference. Now I've also refitted the brake clutch switch here. I put some heat shrink at the top and fitted the connector that I was going to the other end. So that's all done. All that remains for me to do is to take the bike for a bit of a test ride just to make sure that the clutch is operating properly. As you can see, I can only fit one mirror at the moment because this master cylinder doesn't take a mirror, as I said in part 1. I've got some bar end mirrors on the way, so when they arrive, this whole job will be completed. So I'm off to take this bike for a bit of a test ride. After riding the bike, I discovered that the clutch actually has a fair amount of drag, and it was actually quite difficult to get it back into neutral when you pulled up to a stop. I emailed Alex at Maniac Motors, and he suggested that I needed to adjust the clutch from this end, so I'm going to take off the cover and adjust the clutch here to the specification that he recommends. Now I've put the bike on the side stand, so I should be able to take this cover off without losing that much oil. So what we want to do now is screw the clutch adjusting screw all the way in and then screw it out 3.5 to 4 turns. Because what we're looking for is around 2 to 2.5 millimeters lift in the clutch. At the moment I've got about 1.5 millimeters. One, 2, 3, 4, 5. So it's about 4.5. So we want to wind this out 3.5 turns. So that's 1, 2, 3.5. Once we've adjusted the clutch, we just re-lock the lock nut. And we can now refit the cover. Well, the kit is finally installed and I've got most of the kinks ironed out. I'm reasonably happy with it, but I will say that I do believe that the kit should have come with a complete list of instructions, because all through this installation process I've been emailing off to the supplier and getting answers to questions that I've had regarding some problems. Now, I've had a series of problems with the install. The first one was with the little nubbin on the base that holds the slave cylinder. It fits into a cavity in the crankcase, and it measured 10.06 millimeters, whereas the original nubbin for the cable operated clutch was just on 10 millimeters. Now, the supplier did tell me that I could probably heat up the crankcase so that I could actually expand the crankcase and actually get that nubbin to fit. But I thought the difference between the two was too great, so I lineaged that down to around about 10.02 millimeters, and that fitted quite well. Plus I put a little bit of Loctite on it. The second problem I had after that, of course, was the fact that the 3 bolt holes on the slave cylinder didn't quite line up with the threads in the crankcase. Again, I emailed the supplier and was told that they'd never experienced this before, but they did find on a very early 3-cylinder Tornado engine that they had in their workshop that it had a similar problem. So they suggested that I drill out the holes from 6.5 millimeters to 7.5 millimeters, which I did, and that solved the problem. The slave cylinder now fitted perfectly, and it even allowed for a little wriggle room so that there was no stress on the actual fitment of it. So I fitted that, fitted the lines, and then fitted the master cylinder. Now, there are some limitations with how you can position the master cylinder, I've discovered. The actual left-hand switch block here is actually not designed for the profile of a hydraulic master cylinder, which means there's really only one place you can place the lever, and the lever is fairly flat. And there's a risk of it interfering with the switch block, which can affect your lever pull. I managed to work my way around that by positioning the master cylinder in just the right spot. But again, I said, there was a bit of a limitation in where I could put the lever, and the lever ended up a little bit more horizontal than what I'd actually prefer myself. So I filled up with fluid, bled the system, and I took the bike for a test ride just around the driveway, and I was getting a fair amount of drag. So again, I emailed the supplier and they suggested that I adjust the clutch from the other end. So I took the clutch cover off, wound the adjuster all the way in to just where the plates start to lift, and then backed it off 3.5 turns. For the cable operated clutch, it's backed off a quarter turn. But in reality, our hydraulic clutch is really self-adjusting. Now, I'm not quite sure adjusting where the push rod sits, so long as you're not actually pushing the slave cylinder, the puck in the centre of the slave cylinder or the piston right to the back of the slave cylinder, so you actually got pressure on it constantly. How that really does help, but it seems to have helped a little bit, and I certainly seem to have got a little bit more lift on the clutch plate. Now you require roughly between 2 to 2.5 millimeters, 2.5 millimeters being preferred. I was getting, in the end, probably just over 2 millimeters, and so I was still getting a fair bit of drag. Again, another email to the supplier, and they suggested that I adjust the free play in the lever. Now you must be careful when you adjust the free play in a hydraulic system like this, because it's very easy to close off the return port, which means that the actual line from the master cylinder to the clutch slave cylinder, or in the case of a brake from the lever to the caliper, is actually sealed, which means as the fluid gets hot and expands, there's nowhere for it to escape back into the master cylinder. So I've taken care not to do that, so I've still got enough free play to allow for the fluid to return to the reservoir, but I have improved the actual pull on the lever. I also took the lever off and I actually judiciously bent it a little bit just to get a little bit more lift again. And when I reassembled the bike, that seems to have worked well. I now can put the bike into neutral. It's no better than what I had with the cable operated clutch, but it's certainly more than acceptable. You know, the upside of course is that I've now got quite a light clutch lever. And really that was the aim of this whole project. You know, I was having trouble with my alter left hand operating the clutch on this bike, and now the clutch is actually really easy to use. One of the other downsides of this particular conversion is the fact that the master cylinder supplied doesn't have a mirror mount, which means that I will have to change to a different type of mirror, so I've ordered some bar-end mirrors. The other difference I found was that the micro switch had a different plug on the end of it compared to the original one. This one's a hydraulic one with a lead and a plug, whereas the original micro switch was mounted right on the lever and had two little spade connectors on the back of it. Now I've updated the wiring and fixed that problem, so pretty much everything is go now. I had a little bit of oil weeping from the clutch cover. I've tightened up the screws again and that seems to have settled down. I may have to replace that gasket down the track if that leak sort of shows itself again. But was the conversion worth it? Well, definitely. It certainly was worth it for the clutch pull. You know, though I do think that the kit could have included perhaps a different master cylinder with a mirror mount on it. You know, but that's really a minor quibble, really. It's not an inexpensive kit, and I'll put the link to that particular kit in the description below again for those who are interested. But overall, I think after all the trials, I'm quite happy with the outcome. So I think that's about it for this particular video, and I'll catch you next time.